Humans want to learn. You don't have to push them to learn, but you have to create the right environment. And I think we see that in kids every day. Especially the last couple of months have shown that overnight, all of us were challenged to learn new things. We're challenged to suddenly work from home. Business leaders were challenged to lead their teams, their entire organizations from home. So I think that's really exemplified the need for lifelong learning.
Get inspired. Your podcast for more inspiration and your business talk about how to connect, how to empower, and how to get inspired. With amazing guests interviewed by Ricarda, our founder of My Collective.
Hi guys, welcome to My Collective. I'd like to start this podcast with a quote by Albert Einstein, as cheesy as that might sound. He once said that learning is not the product of schooling, but of a lifelong attempt to acquire it. And today we're talking about lifelong learning with a young and dynamic professor who's shaking things up at the Technical University of Munich, Claudia Peuss. On the one hand, there is a life skill that we can pick up along the way, especially when we're confronted with a steep learning curve like parenthood. The question is, how do these parenting skills make us better leaders? But then on the other side, of course, as a university professor, Claudia Peuss also had a few things to say about acquired skills and how to bust stereotypes and get people to pay attention. So it's never too late to learn. Prepare to get inspired. Welcome, Claudia. I'm very excited that you're with us. These are our impulse sessions where we talk about how we connect, how we empower, and how we inspire. And we want to talk with you about lifelong learning, something that's important not only for us, also for the generations to come and the generations that have already aged. So the question here is it too late? What do we need to learn? Especially interesting for us would be what we as businesswomen and young mothers should focus on. One major question is, are we not too tired for it? It's there's a long list of questions. And I would love to discuss it with you. Just to shortly introduce you, you're a professor of research and science management at the TU Munich and the senior vice president for talent management and diversity, which is really interesting for us. And you've just founded the TUM Institute for Lifelong Learning. And that's what we want to talk about. So let me start with the first question of why. Why lifelong learning? Why is this topic important for you? And why now?
Okay, why lifelong learning? I think especially the last couple of weeks, last couple of months have shown that overnight, all of us were challenged to learn new things. We're challenged to suddenly work from home. Many business leaders were challenged to lead their teams, their entire organizations from home. So I think that's really exemplified the need for lifelong learning. I can also put it in more quantitative terms. There's an interesting study conducted by MIT Sloan and together with Deloitte, the consulting company, and they surveyed roughly 4,500 business leaders before the pandemic, we have to stress in this case, about how often do they have to update their skills. And more than half of them said at least once a year. And again, I'm stressing before the pandemic because I think by now everyone is aware of the fact that we have to continuously update our skills and maybe even our mindset, but we have to stay open to learning. So I think right now is more important than ever before. And at TUM, we believe that a university should play an important role. So in other words, we should be, in a sense, a one-stop shop that offers research-based but practically oriented lifelong learning. And a large university like TUM that has so many different departments ranging from obviously management, but all the tech areas, information sciences, math, all the way to medicine, should offer this kind of lifelong learning, continuous education to specialists and leaders from all realms of society. That's a bit of a paradigm shift, especially in Germany, where we used to believe that, in a sense, you go to a university once, you get a wonderful education, and that gets you through your career the next 30 years. But obviously that's not true anymore.
So what are we missing here in Germany? Is there something in specific that specifically Germans need to sort of speed up on?
Yeah, I think the notion that it's not only okay, but necessary to return to university after you graduated, after you got your, bachelor's, master's, diploma, maybe even your PhD, but that you continuously go back. That's a little bit of a shift in Germany. I think in other countries, especially United States and maybe England, it was much more common. And so we at TUM want to be at the vanguard of that mind shift.
And what does that specifically mean for us as women? Are there specific things that, let's say, maybe more on the more generic side, as future leaders, what do you need as a future leader? What are these skills that you need to upgrade every half year? And what do you think should women upgrade every half year? What are the skills that you would recommend one should constantly look at and look out for and add?
Yeah, I think that's a question I get asked quite a bit right now. What do the leaders of today and of tomorrow need? I think it's a couple of things. Let me focus on three. Number one, I think now more than ever, it's important for business leaders of various branches to understand the latest technological advances. I don't think you have to be a specialist, but I think you have to know what's out there. In other words, you have to understand the potential of latest technologies, be it AI, be it additive manufacturing, be it biotechnology, just to understand how does that impact my business model? How does that impact how we communicate with customers? How does it impact how we produce things, etc.? So I think that's more important than ever. Number two, I think at the end of the day, although there's so much change out there, one thing is largely constant, and that's human needs. So I think leaders are more than ever challenged to understand human needs, to, in a sense, understand how humans work better than that was the case in the past, and to try to meet those needs. Be it, for example, right now, the pandemic is a massive loss of control for most people, right? I mean, this was not really predictable. We don't really know how to handle it, et cetera, et cetera. So leaders are much more challenged than ever before to the way they can establish control, the feeling of control, and be it by, predicting small things, explaining why the company is doing things or not doing certain things. So I think that's the second big one. A third big one, I think, at the end of the day, with all the new technologies, almost anything is possible. And in order to be able to decide, which route to take and what to do and what not to do, especially, we need an internal compass, so to speak. And I think that needs to consist of values, right? I think now as a leader, you have to really know what you stand for. I mean, do you stand for innovation? Do you stand for fairness, for respect? What does that mean, right? And how would you prioritize those? Because a lot of the times they're in conflict. And looking at the question, what might be particularly relevant for women? I mean, this might be a bit stereotypical, but there is research evidence that women have a better tendency of, listening. In other words, they are probably more attuned to human needs, to understanding what the others need. I think that's a big strength. And it's also a sort of a leadership competency that's needed much more than before. And I think personally, if now maybe women on parental leave, take the opportunity to really get a little bit of an update on what's going on in terms of technology, I think that's a major advantage because it's counter-stereotypical. So in other words, if you're the one, in your organization who knows best what, let's say, additive manufacturing can do, what, I don't know, the latest trends in AI are, everyone's going to be surprised and everyone's going to totally notice. And I think that that's a smart move, especially for women, because stereotypically that's maybe not what others expect of women.
I think that's a great addition, because we just went through a training where we basically we always try to translate parenting skills into leadership skills. And one way of doing it is looking at how a screaming baby can teach you active listening skills. And you've mentioned we should add an AI course to sort of complement this. And I think that's a really great idea. And I remember from some of the conversations with you is that you've done a lot of sort of research, really looking at the comparison Asia, sort of North America and Europe. And is there something that you would say, some learning, some tips and tricks of how others have done it, maybe also something that you saw as a role model or have seen as patterns that work in your studies?
Yeah, as you're saying, I was lucky enough to be allowed to interview high-ranking female managers in various different countries, including the US, Germany, India, Singapore, and China. One thing that really stuck to my mind, because it impressed me back then, was the degree to which many of them said, be true to yourself, find out what you're about, what you really care about, and then choose that as your career path. Don't choose a job just based on money or status or title, but really, make sure it's in line with what you really want to be or who you really want to be. I think that's very powerful. Another one was think big. What's the big vision? Don't sell yourself too cheap, in a sense. Find mentors who help you, but also who maybe challenge you, who allow you to take risks and make mistakes. I think that's one thing that women especially have to learn, because we're a bit more risk averse. And those were important insights, I think. And then really, obviously they said, well, I was impressed and shocked to some degree by the dedication they had all shown to their careers. And maybe one thing that was interesting, because it emerged in the US, and I think we see it in Germany much more than before, is a shift in the career paradigm. In Germany, until recently, I think the idea of a career was a very linear path upward, right? And if you ever leave it, for example, because of family reasons, or because you want to run a marathon or whatever, you're kind of out of the game. And at the time I did the first interviews in Germany, this was very much what the women stressed. And the American women didn't. Mm-hmm. Many of them described how their careers had been very nonlinear. They drew. At the beginning of the interviews, I had them draw their careers. And I was very surprised how many of them, went up and then sideways for a while. Maybe they took some time off and they moved to different organization, et cetera, et cetera. So in a sense, they said, I looked for the organizations that would fulfill my needs at that time. For example, at a certain time, I was not willing to travel. I could not work, 12 hours a day because of family reasons. So I didn't. But then a couple of years later, my kids were older or whatever, then I went back on the fast track. And I think that's interesting. And back then, 10 years ago, I think in Germany, that was largely impossible because of that narrow linear path. And the good thing is, I think that's changing much more. And maybe the pandemic is helping that, because we are questioning so many things, including, do I have to be in the office all the time? Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm even more productive at home. So I think it's a great time now.
It's really interesting that you say some things are possible, and here in Germany, it's different. So there's one topic that comes to my mind is childcare in correlation with women doing a career. And it feels like a lot of women, specifically in Germany, hesitate to return to their jobs full-time or in whatever kind of career path, because they are hesitant with regard to external or family external childcare. But you do hear at the same time people like Janina Kugel saying in various talks that you need to be prepared to spend a certain amount of your income on childcare to proceed. But this is a big discussion, and also the source for bad conscience that a lot of, especially women, less men, carry around while they're at work. What's your take on this?
Oh, I totally agree with you that for probably historical reasons in Germany, there's still this notion that, especially small children need to be taken care of by their moms. And if not, something bad happens to them. And for me, it was interesting. I spent a lot of time in the US, and they didn't have that idea. The word Rabenmutter, there is no English equivalent. I remember explaining that to my colleagues there, and they're like, what are you talking about? So they didn't have the issue. And that was very helpful for me to see that the Americans had no issues. I have friends from France. Best friend of my husband's has 6 children. And his wife said, it was totally clear to me, after having my 4th one, that I returned to work. And only the German friends had an issue. So I thought that's very helpful. And I think at the end of the day, it needs to be an individual choice that, the couple makes. And personally, I think everyone should have the liberty to make the choice that fits them best. And I don't think the stereotypes should be so strong. And it's interesting that statistically speaking, we still, with regard to that attitude, see a division between former East Germany and West Germany. Former East Germans, again, don't have the issue. So maybe it's helpful to find friends there.
And and before we all start finding friends in France and East Germany, I remember that you were saying something that there's a connection between this sort of educational research and leadership research, and that what we call in Germany, I'm just going to say that in German, it's this Bindungsforschung, right? Is that there is a impact or backlash on leadership skills, or not skills, leadership research. Can you explain that a little bit better than I did just now?
Yeah, there's a bit of which I think is interesting, research linking the attachment theory, your style of attachment to the person who most takes care of you. It doesn't have to be your mom. It could be, but it could also be your dad or your grandma or someone else. So attachment style at the age of 3 is a pretty significant predictor of, the way you are forming intimate relations at the age of roughly 20, and also has something to do with your leadership style. But again, the good news is, and we talked about this, right? You can have a wonderful relation with your child, and the child can have, perfect, secure attachment, and it's not dependent on you 24/7 caring of him or her. So in other words, it's about quality time. That's also something that the American managers I interviewed said. Yes, I work full time, but when I come home, I try to spend quality time with my kids. I don't, first thing, I don't know, clean the floor or whatever. I try to outsource all the other stuff so that I have quality time with my kids. And I think that's interesting. And I think in a sense that it hopefully helps counteract that German stereotype of, you can't leave your child with someone else. Otherwise, it's going to have a terrible attachment to you, and then be a terrible leader later in life, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not about the number of hours, but is the quality.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I think that's absolutely fantastic to hear good and encouraging positive news from an international comparison. And given the fact that you're not only researching, but you're also active at the TU Munich as sort of with the diversity flag in your hand, you're changing this and getting more professors on board, women professors, and also students. And you're active in your own field. And I would like to also ask you one last question. Talking about own field, is which parenting skills did you yourself convert into a leadership skill?
That's a great question. I mean, I hope people in my team will agree. Trying to set up an environment that allows people to be curious and learn, because at the end of the day, humans want to learn. You don't have to push them to learn, but you have to create the right environment. And I think obviously we see that in kids every day, right? And I'm trying to make sure that we have an environment that it allows everyone in the team to be curious, to try out different things, and to continuously learn and enjoy learning, enjoy trying out new stuff just the way that kids do. So I think that's something that's hopefully a skill that I learned and I continue to learn. And of course, the multitasking helps. And finally, I find, coming home and having a whole world of other things that are really important sometimes is really helpful, because it takes the attraction and maybe your personal attention and your reflection on, the last meeting, etc., away, because all of a sudden there's someone demanding your full attention, and that's good.
That's true. So a colorful new work, new office, and new work lifestyle as well. Cool. Thank you so much, Claudia. Thanks a lot.